My wife asked for one simple thing. The problem started right there, because when someone says simple, what they really mean is simple for a person who already knows what I'm thinking. I don't live there. I live in the place where instructions echo for a second and then disappear like a ghost that's late for another haunting. She said it casually too, which is dangerous. When someone says something casually, you assume there's room for creativity. There is not. Casual means this is a test you didn't study for and the grade counts. She asked me to handle it while she was gone. And I said yes immediately because confidence is my first mistake. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I don't believe in them. I feel like follow-up questions show weakness. Marriage is all about pretending you've got it under control while quietly Googling things later. Nodded like a guy in a meeting who definitely doesn't know what the spreadsheet means, but hopes no one calls on him. She left. The house got quiet in that way, where the walls feel like witnesses. Now I'm standing there thinking, how hard can this be? Which is another phrase I use right before everything goes sideways. I start doing the task, but halfway through I realize there are multiple ways to do it, and none of them feel officially approved. Choose the way that feels efficient, because efficiency sounds responsible, and responsibility feels like what adults do. Immediately something feels off, but I keep going because stopping would require admitting I might be wrong. I'm already committed emotionally. While I'm doing this, I'm narrating my own actions in my head like I'm explaining it later in court. I thought this would help. That's the sentence I'm preparing. I add a little extra effort because extra effort should count for something. It never does, but I believe in it every time. Extra effort is how I decorate mistakes. I step back, look at what I've done, and I think, this looks done. Not right. Just done. There's a difference. She comes home. I can tell immediately by the way she pauses, not even saying anything, that I've entered the danger zone. It's not yelling. Yelling would be easier. This is quiet math happening behind her eyes. She's calculating how long it will take to explain why this is wrong versus how tired she is. I start talking first because silence is how you lose. I explain my logic, which makes sense to me, and that's the problem. My logic is a solo activity. That's not what I meant. And I say, okay, which has never once helped any situation in human history. I can feel myself digging. Keep digging because maybe there's treasure down there. There is not. There's just more dirt. She explains what she meant, and it's exactly what she said the first time, just with invisible details that I was supposed to magically absorb through love. Now I'm trying to fix it, but once you've complicated something, fixing it just adds layers. It's like trying to untangle headphones by pulling harder. I'm sweating over something that should have taken 5 minutes, and now it's become a personality flaw. She's watching me the way you watch someone parallel park when you're already late. Feel her patience doing stretches, warming up to leave. I start apologizing, but it's not a clean apology. It's one of those apologies that explains itself, and she doesn't want context. She wants time travel. She wants the version of me who asked one clarifying question. I promise I'll redo it. And she says, I'll just do it, which is the most polite way to say, please stop touching things. That's when it hits me that I didn't just mess up the task. I messed up the trust of the task. I stand there, useless now, holding an object that no longer has a purpose, thinking about how confident I was at the beginning. That confidence feels rude in hindsight. I try to help by handing her things, but now everything I touch feels suspicious. I become a liability. I'm waiting for instructions like a robot that's been rebooted, hoping for a simple command I can't misinterpret, knowing deep down that even simple is dangerous when I'm involved, because somehow I always find the scenic route to the wrong answer. I can feel there's still one part of this that hasn't even gone wrong, yet the moment my wife asked for that one simple thing, said yes immediately, and that's how I know I was wrong. Not later, not when it fell apart, right there. Because nothing good has ever started with me saying yes too fast. I didn't pause, I didn't clarify, I didn't even blink in a responsible way. I just agreed like a guy who wants credit for effort before effort is required. There's something about being asked to do something simple that activates a confidence in me I did not earn. I hear the word simple and my brain translates into, this will require no additional information and absolutely no adult supervision. She didn't even ask in a serious tone. That's the part that fooled me. It was casual, almost friendly, like she was ordering coffee. And when instructions are casual, assume the rules are loose. I assume there's room for interpretation. There is not. Casual instructions are the strictest ones. They come with invisible footnotes, and I don't read footnotes. I nodded like I understood, even though my understanding stopped at the word thing. That was the whole plan. The rest I figured I'd improvise. I didn't ask questions because questions feel like doubt, and doubt feels like weakness. I wanted to appear capable. I wanted to look like a man who could be trusted with a task without turning it into a meeting. I thought, I ask follow-up questions, she'll think I can't handle it. What I didn't consider is that not asking questions is how you guarantee you cannot handle it. But in that moment, confidence felt like the responsible choice. Confidence feels clean. It feels efficient. It feels like adulthood. Smart. As soon as she walked away, I replayed the request in my head. And that's when it started getting fuzzy. The sentence felt shorter than it should have been, like there were parts missing. I told myself that if details were important, she would have said them. That logic made sense to me, which should have been my first warning sign. When something only makes sense to you, that's usually not a good sign in a shared living situation. I stood there thinking about how proud I was for agreeing so quickly. I felt accomplished already, which is dangerous because nothing had been done yet. I was enjoying imaginary praise for a job I hadn't even started. That's when you know you're in trouble. When the confidence comes before the action is about to disappoint everyone involved. I told myself this was going to be easy. Added pressure by deciding I'd do it efficiently. Efficiency is my favorite excuse. It sounds smart. It sounds like something a person with a system would say. I didn't have a system, but I was confident I could invent one on the spot. I convinced myself that overthinking would only complicate things, which is ironic because that belief is exactly how I complicate things. By the time I actually started, I wasn't focused on doing it right. I was focused on proving that my initial confidence was justified. That became the real task. Not the thing she asked for, but protecting the version of me who said yes without hesitation, because if that version of me was wrong, then everything after that was going to be uncomfortable, and I could already feel that discomfort waiting nearby. Just watching me get started, the problem with the word simple is that it sounds complete. It has no hidden compartments. When my wife said it, I assumed it meant there was one way to do the thing, and that way would be obvious to anyone with eyes and basic motor skills. What I didn't realize is that simple doesn't mean short, and it definitely doesn't mean optional details are removed. Simple just means she's already done all the thinking. I was supposed to walk into the situation with the same mental blueprint she had, even though she never handed me the blueprint. In my mind, simple meant flexible. It meant there was room for interpretation. It meant I could make decisions. That's where I went wrong, because when someone asks you for something simple, they are not asking for creativity. They are asking for accuracy. They want it done one specific way, and they want that way done quietly. Treated it like a suggestion, not a requirement, like guidelines. Marriage does not run on guidelines. I replayed the sentence again, trying to find clues. I focused on the words she used instead of the meaning behind them, because words feel safer. Words are concrete. Meaning requires awareness. I told myself that if she wanted it done a particular way, she would have said so. That logic relies heavily on the belief that everything important is spoken out loud, which is optimistic at best and reckless at worst. There were expectations attached to that request that lived entirely in her head, and I just walked right past them like they were furniture I didn't recognize. What made it worse is that I genuinely believed I was being reasonable. I wasn't ignoring her request. I was honoring it, just in a way that felt right to me. I filled in the gaps with my own assumptions. Those assumptions were based on how I would want it done if I were her, which should have been another red flag, because I am not her. That distinction matters more than I give it credit for. I moved forward. I started making choices. Small ones at first, harmless ones. The kind of choices that don't feel like decisions until later, when you realize every single one of them mattered. I told myself that details were subjective, that there was more than one correct way to do this, and statistically speaking, I had a decent chance of landing close enough. That's a comforting thought. Close enough, but it has never held up under inspection. The real issue wasn't that I misunderstood. It was that I didn't know I was misunderstanding. There's a confidence that comes with thinking you're aligned when you're not. I felt calm. I felt focused. Meanwhile, I was drifting further away from what she actually wanted with every step, but I had no internal alarm system for that. Nothing in my brain said, maybe check. My brain said, you've got this? Keep going. By the time I realized there might be a difference between what was asked and what was expected, I was already committed to my version. Changing course would have meant admitting that simple. Wasn't simple for me. That's a hard thing to accept when you've already told yourself a story where you're doing great. The gap between those two meanings was quietly widening, just waiting for someone else to notice. At every step, I had a reason for what I was doing, and that was the most dangerous part. Nothing I did felt random. Every choice came with a calm explanation that made perfect sense to me, which meant I never stopped to question it. Wasn't guessing. I was deciding. That's a big difference in my head. Guessing sounds careless. Deciding sounds responsible. I felt like a guy with a plan, even though the plan was being invented in real time by someone with no authority. In my mind, logic works like this. If A seems reasonable, then B should follow. And if B follows, then C is practically required. It's a very smooth system when no one else is involved. I moved from one step to the next with confidence, reassuring myself that this was how a thoughtful person would handle it. I even slowed down a bit, not because I was being careful, Because careful looks good. Careful feels like effort, and effort feels like it should earn forgiveness later, if needed. The problem is my logic lives entirely inside my head. It doesn't travel well. If you don't live there, it sounds unhinged. But while I'm inside it, everything is connected. I tell myself I'm anticipating problems before they happen. Proactive, I'm not just doing the task, I'm protecting the task. That's how I justify adding steps that were never requested. I convince myself that future me will be grateful for this extra thinking, even though present me is already slightly confused. I explain things to myself as I go, like I'm narrating a documentary about a man who almost has it together. This makes sense, I think, which is a phrase I trust way too much. I don't test it against reality. Don't imagine how this would look to anyone else. I assume that if the logic is solid, the result will be appreciated. That assumption ignores a key factor, which is that appreciation usually depends on matching expectations, not showcasing thought processes. As I continue, my logic starts stacking. One decision leans on the last decision. Now there's a structure forming. It feels impressive. It feels too big to stop. At this point, backing out would mean dismantling the entire system, and I don't have the energy for that. I'm committed now, not to the task, but to the reasoning behind it. I need my logic to be right. Because if it's wrong, then I didn't just make a mistake. I spent time defending a mistake to myself, and that's embarrassing on a personal level. And they're smart. I don't notice that the logic is drifting away from the original request because the logic has momentum. It's self-sustaining. Every new step confirms the previous one. There's no pause for reflection, just forward motion. I'm not checking if this is what she wanted. I'm checking if this still fits my explanation, and it does, which is all the confirmation I need. By the time I'm done, I feel strangely proud. Not because of the result, but because of the journey my brain took to get there. I've built a solid case for my actions. I'm ready to present it, if necessary, completely unaware that the only person who understands this case is me. And that understanding is about to be tested by someone who never agreed to my logic in the first place and is definitely not going to ask follow-up questions before reacting. Once I sensed that something might be slightly off, my instinct wasn't to stop, it was to improve. That's always my move. I don't correct mistakes, I upgrade them. I tell myself that if I add enough effort, the original problem will disappear under the weight of my intentions. I don't scale back, I lean in. I double down like a man who believes momentum can replace accuracy. At first, the fixes are subtle, small adjustments that feel harmless. I convince myself these changes are preventative. I'm catching issues before they become noticeable. I'm not reacting to a mistake. I'm staying ahead of it. That's what I tell myself. But every fix introduces a new variable, and variables are where things start to slide. Instead of simplifying, I'm building layers, and each layer requires another explanation that only I will ever hear. What really gets me is the feeling that stopping now would mean wasting the effort I've already put in. I've invested time. I've invested thought. That creates a weird loyalty to the wrong direction. Turning back feels irresponsible. Continuing feels brave. I choose brave, which is how I end up standing in the middle of something that now looks nothing like what was originally requested, but feels impressive in its own confusing way. I start adding steps no one asked for. Not because they're necessary, but because they feel helpful. Helpful is a dangerous word. Helpful is subjective. Helpful is how you end up explaining yourself later using phrases like, I thought this would make it better. Better is another word that needs supervision. Better compared to what? Better for who? These are questions I do not ask in the moment. I'm focused on effort because effort is visible. Visible things feel defensible. At some point, I realize I'm working harder than I should be. That realization doesn't stop me. It motivates me. I think, well, I'm already this far in. That sentence has carried me into so many unnecessary situations. It's not a plan. It's a surrender dressed up as confidence. I'm managing problems created by the fixes I added to solve the problems I created earlier. Somehow this still feels like progress. I step back occasionally to look at what I've done. I'm not evaluating it. I'm admiring it. I'm impressed by the complexity. I mistake complexity for quality. Simple would have been easier, but now it's too late for simple. Simple had its chance. We're past that. We're in something bigger now. Something with moving parts. Something that requires explanation. I'm already rehearsing that explanation in my head just in case. The more complicated it gets, the more confident I feel that this will all make sense in the end. That's the lie I tell myself to keep going. I believe that effort guarantees understanding, that once she sees how much thought went into this, she'll appreciate it. Imagine the moment where I walk her through it step by step, and she nods, impressed by my thoroughness, completely ignoring the fact that she never wanted a walkthrough in the first place. By the time I'm finished, I'm exhausted. Not physically. Mentally, I've turned a 5-minute request into a full project. I'm surrounded by evidence of my involvement. I can't tell if that evidence proves responsibility or guilt. All I know is I've created something that requires context. Anything that requires context is already in trouble, especially when the original request was supposed to be simple. Fixes just keep stacking, daring someone to ask why any of this exists at all. The moment she walked in, nothing happened. That's how I knew everything had happened. She didn't say a word. She just stopped, not dramatically, not obviously. Just enough of a pause to let the room change temperature. Silence like that isn't empty. It's loaded. It's the kind of silence where you suddenly become aware of your own breathing and wonder if you're doing it too loud. I stood there watching her process, knowing she was seeing something very different from what I thought I had created. Her eyes moved slowly, taking inventory, and I followed her gaze like maybe if I saw it through her eyes, I'd understand where things went wrong. But I didn't. I just saw my work, my effort, my decisions. The silence kept stretching, which made me nervous because silence means thinking. Thinking means conclusions are being formed without my input. I wanted to explain. I didn't know where to start because explaining assumes there's confusion. And right now, the problem wasn't confusion. The problem was recognition. There's a specific look people get when they're disappointed, but still polite enough to wait. It's not anger. It's not frustration. It's more like they're quietly adjusting their expectations of you in real time. That look hurts more than yelling because yelling means hope. Yelling means you might still be part of the solution. This look felt like she was deciding whether it was worth unpacking how we got here or if it would be easier to just move on without me. I tried to read her face for clues, but her face had gone neutral, which is terrifying. Neutral means she's already thought through every possible explanation I might give and decided none of them would help. Opened my mouth to say something, then closed it because I realized anything I said would sound like a defense. Defenses only make sense when someone is attacking. She wasn't attacking. She was observing. In my head, I started narrating. I started preparing my case. I had reasons. Good ones, logical ones. I could walk her through every step. I could explain why each decision led naturally to the next. I just needed a chance. But the longer the silence lasted, the more I realized she wasn't going to ask. She didn't need the explanation. She could already tell that this was the result of too much confidence and not enough clarification. She finally spoke. It wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional, which somehow made it worse. Calm means control. Calm means she's already past the point where my feelings matter in this moment. She said just enough to let me know this was not what she meant. She said it in a way that suggested she couldn't believe that needed to be clarified. That's when I felt it. The shift, the realization that I wasn't about to be corrected. I was about to be evaluated, not just on the task, but on how I thought, on how I listened, on how confidently I went in the wrong direction without checking once. I wanted to jump in to explain, to reclaim some ground, but before I could, heavier this time, like it was daring me to make it worse. I stood there holding on to my reasoning, waiting for the moment to release it, watching her look at the situation like someone deciding whether to fix something themselves or pretend it never existed. And I could feel that the longer I stayed quiet, the more obvious it became that the silence wasn't awkward. It was intentional. It was doing more damage than any argument ever could. At some point, without anyone officially announcing it, stopped being helpful and became a risk. I could feel it happen. The air shifted. My presence went from supportive to suspicious. Every move I made now required supervision. I was still standing there, still willing, still emotionally invested, but none of that mattered anymore. I had crossed an invisible line where effort no longer counted and intention was no longer relevant. Tried to reinsert myself carefully, the way you do when you realize you might be in the wrong lane, but you're not sure how to merge back. I asked if she wanted help. They're smart, which was a mistake, because by that point, the question itself was evidence that I didn't understand the situation. Help had been wanted, it would have been requested. Asking felt polite, but politeness doesn't fix momentum. It just highlights how late you are to realizing you should have slowed down. She started fixing it, and I watched closely, trying to learn. I thought maybe if I observed carefully, I could anticipate the next step and jump in at the right moment. That was optimistic. Every time I moved, she paused, and that pause said everything. It said, please don't add another variable. I wasn't being micromanaged. I was being contained. Become the kind of person who needs clear boundaries for everyone's safety. I held something in my hands that used to have a purpose. Now it was just there. I didn't know where to put it. I didn't know if I should keep holding it or set it down. I stood frozen, afraid that any movement would be interpreted as initiative, and initiative was no longer welcome. I realized I had gone from problem solver to potential problem creator without ever intending to. That transition was quiet, but it was complete. What made it worse was that I still felt capable. That confidence hadn't left me. It was just no longer useful. I had ideas. I had suggestions. I had thoughts I genuinely believed could help. I couldn't share any of them because sharing them would mean I hadn't learned anything. Silence was now the only acceptable contribution, and I am not naturally gifted at silence. I started narrating again, but this time internally. Not explanations, reflections. I replayed the moment she asked for the simple thing, the moment I said yes too fast, the moment I decided I didn't need clarification. All of it felt very clear now, which is frustrating because clarity after the fact is worthless. It doesn't undo anything. It just makes you aware of how avoidable the whole situation was. I wanted to apologize, but I didn't want to apologize wrong. Didn't want to apologize in a way that reopened the issue or shifted attention back to me. There's a type of apology that helps, and a type that just asks for forgiveness without earning it. I stood there trying to figure out which one this moment required, realizing that even now, I was still overthinking instead of reading the room. I could feel myself shrinking out of the process, becoming background noise in my own house, not ignored, managed. I was waiting for a clear instruction, a direct request, something safe. I could do that wouldn't create another ripple. I was ready to follow directions now. I was fully prepared to be simple. The only problem was that the moment for that had already passed, and I was left standing there, hyper-aware, quietly hoping that staying still would somehow count as progress, while knowing deep down that the hardest part wasn't fixing what went wrong, realizing how easily I had turned one simple thing into something that no longer needed me at all. So in the end, I learned something very important. When your wife asks for one simple thing, simple is a trap. It's not simple for you. It's simple for her, which is a very different kind of simple. And no matter how confident you are, how much logic you build in your head, there's always going to be a gap between what you think she wants and what she actually wants. The best you can do is slow down. They're smart. Ask one clarifying question, and maybe, just maybe, accept that your good intentions are not enough. Because in marriage, the line between helping and complicating is about one small step, and somehow I always take a mile. And that's where the comedy lives, the part where you're standing there holding an object that no longer has a purpose, knowing you've made things worse and still trying to convince yourself it's impressive. That's marriage. That's life. Somehow we keep coming back for more.